Alright, Cataclysm Revisited. The Adam and Eve story history of Cataclysm, Shannon Thomas. I think we're at 38. Cataclysm Revisited. The last cataclysm, known as Noah's Flood, is pretty easy to say. It was started with the New Stone Age, brought to about with the conditions following with the last inundation, which was the basic requirements of living no longer available, with similarly the informatization ideology has been allowed by nature, was continued on to the path that interrupted thousands of legends ago rose. Two cataclysms ago, roughly 10,500 years ago, which we know as Adam and Eve's flood, was the start of the Old Stone Age. You can find these two last Stone Ages almost in last Stone Ages almost any junior high school general science textbook. There again, the Stone Age was induced with total lack of the basic requirements of living, extremely difficult to find data of the air between the two cataclysms, but with the plus of the course of the uniformity geology pursued its normal path between cataclysm and era history, it's also legendary. Three cataclysms ago, roughly 18,500 years ago, little after the day of the mention of the Genesis 11,400 Shinder cave of the Iraq gave us the best data of all. Is discussed in this textbook, in the text of this book on page 98. Four cataclysm years ago, 29,000 years ago, was the end of the Wisconsin era. We found with more data than we found with the third ago cataclysm. Five cataclysms ago, 43,800 years ago, was derived the Jesse Hale, a super mathematician, and really is real. It's a real search, slowly, painstakingly, as in putting the piece of the puzzle together. The more pieces we find fit into the picture, the more pieces they're throwing on the table to throw off, the more colorful, the dramatic the picture becomes. Did you understand that there are three cataclysms recorded in the Bible, known as Adam's Eve, and the one before that, if you missed the check in Genesis 2? I wish we had funds to dig with the search of the year of the Tahitianos, with a small idea that we could give the found of the prehistoric city of the South Africa can be gained, and by reading two books which I have mentioned before, the will again with the calendar of Tanisio and the greater idol of Tanisio, both a tremendous research with Schindler, Bellamy, and Peter Allen. Conclusion drawn by Bellamy and Allen in those monumental works for the startlingly close to mind and city has lived these three epochs between cataclysms, the oldest ending at 11,500 years ago, terminating with a cataclysm, the period of the history of the which, when it was at sea level, starting beyond about 5,000 years, during the which at the bottom of the Pacific, unheaving during the cataclysm about 7,000 years ago, along with its ocean bed, was a rise presented altitude of 12,500 feet. Cataclysm produced Noah's flood, gave birth on Niagara Falls, started with the Ohio River flowing into the Mississippi, started with the Neolithic Stone Age, raised the level of the ocean more than 200 feet all over the world, initiated the era of the modern history of all over the planet, such as Greece, India, and Egypt, gave birth to the epic of the Galishma, containing the story of the Noah's flood, written in the Sumerian thousands of years before the Hebrews wrote about the Genesis. Each cataclysm is like a giant with a hard sweeping all across the countryside, leaving the fingerprints upon the finger, find a mode of the elephant footprints of science in our search for the solution of the consuming mystery. These fingerprints are well hidden among the heavy footprints of the uniformity evidence for the two disciplines of the uniformity geology, cataclysm, and geology, but have no contest between them. Each one of these plays in the signs of each of the complement each other, and actually a marriage of the two schools in order. Some of the cataclysmic fingerprints have been mentioned in the chapter 2, but let's discuss more of the detail of the story of the frozen mammoth. Intriguing indeed, but the frozen mammoth was ever found in the ice. All of them were found with the homogeneous muck. It used to be that they could buy with the frozen mammoth and steaks out in an Alaskan restaurant. The meat had been so well preserved with the quick freezing of the muck after the mammoth drowning, suffocating to death, and then maintaining a frozen status for almost 7,000 years. Perhaps the most known of the thousands from the Thusli with the Berzavok mammoth found near the Berzavok River near Siberia. Like all mammoth found, some of the comments were made with concern of the skull, with the note that the skull was pink and the hemorrhaging in the head, plus the fact that he had a penile erection. Both of those facts have the evidence sufficient to prove that suffocated to death in the surrounding homogeneous muck, for he was frozen so bad he kept frozen almost 7,000 years during the erection was kept on a frozen record constantly until he was found. The Bersovic mammoth was found in 1900, and more scientific data was gathered recorded with the animal. Any other further frozen behemoth. It's true that the beast has almost initiated more scientific controversy than any other such find. To my way of thinking, one man's work stands far above all the others. Ivan T. standards, a biologist, he approached the problem from a frozen food viewpoint and was the only one to do so. This is his story. When you freeze meat, the problem is that the freeze fast enough of the moisture contained in the meat does not have time to form large crystals while freezing. The faster the freeze, the smaller the crystal. The faster freeze the meat slowly, the moisture will form in the crystals large enough to destroy the fibrous structure of the meat. But the defrosting of the meat will be nothing more than a mass of goo unfit for the cook to eat. But the larger piece of the meat over the more difficult it is to freeze the fast enough to avoid information from the destructive moisture crystals. For heat must be removed at the same rate, but from which to save a half steer from a half of the pound of ground meat. It would be the same problem if you had to freeze a bucket of the tub of the water in the same time it takes to freeze a thimble. Now, a mammoth weighs up to 5 tons. The mammoth found in Siberia were somewhat smaller, but still several tons animal. But the Bersovic mammoth was desiccated by Russian scientists in 1901. The record that even the innermost lining of the beast of the stomach had a perfectly preserved fibrous structure, indicating that his body had been removed by some super prodigious process in nature. Sanderson, taking a special notice of the one point, took the problem to the American Frozen Flood Institute, which takes the free of the entire mammoth over the moisture content of even in the innermost part of the world, even in the inner lining of the stomach. We do not have time enough to form crystals large enough to destroy the meat fiber structure. Alright, the Institute really attacked the problem of the free of the quarter of the half steer of the present with the big enough of the problem of the whole mammoth. Some of the weeks later, the Institute went back to the Sanderson with an answer from the utterly impossible with all of the scientific engineering knowledge. The absolutely no way to remove the body heat from the carcass as a big mammoth fast enough to freeze it with a large moisture crystal forming in the meat. And furthermore, after exhausting a scientific engineering technique, they looked at the nature of the conclusion that there's no known process of the nature which could accomplish this feat. So many of them loosely claim that the Berzikian mammoth fell in a crevice, fell in the ice, and so much more, some such nonsense. This is absolutely positively irrevocable, no explanation of the known process of nature of explaining the quick freezing of the Berzikian mammoth, currently with the muck in which it was suffocated and drowned. Institute did tell Sanderson what it takes to do the job. However, first of all, the body temperature of the mammoth must be lowered to 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 70 degrees centigrade. From its normal temperature, it must be accomplished at an absolute outside time limit of approximately 4 hours. Actually, the concluded freezing process would have to take place in a elapsed time closer to 2 hours. The Institute did not take into account the fact of the conclusion of the two other facts of the main, with the first one, the fact with the entire strata with the muck with the was frozen concurrently with the mammoth, the second one, the fact that the erection had been preserved by quick freezing. The second one of these facts with the actual freezing time of the far below the 2 hours, all but the 2 of the 4 represents is hour limited of the time in which the freezing process to have then taken the place with no longer moisture of the crystallization to have the form to deepen the meat. Second fault tells of the freezing time, at least the entire strata of the muck of the outermost of the mammoth had to be less than 1 minute, perhaps more like half a minute. Whole process by speak with the inhuman, supernatural violence. No one foreleg, some ribs and pelvis were in fracture. Do you realize that it takes to break the mammoth of foreleg and its pelvic bone? He was buried in the sea with the muck formed with a supersonically moving water, gathering a homogeneous muck, suffocated, drowned in the muck, with quick freezing in the muck of the entire utterly impossible sequence of events, but nonetheless the process was performed, then kept frozen and preserved almost 7,000 years. The goodness of the scientific and intellectual courtesy of the Russian Tsar was assigned to the scientific team responsible to form the expedition into the far outreach of the eastern Siberia to bring back although the scientific analysis found that the mammoth near the Berskov River today is the same mammoth that mounted in the museum in Moscow. I believe I am correct in stating that the first time such a large animal was ever mounted in taxidermists on a team a team of taxidermists Where did the mud come from? With the buried from the mammoth alive with the frozen mud can be also be found with all northern Siberia and Alaska. Alaska have the frozen blanket range of 29 to 90 feet thick. We have been able to stay with the frozen tundra more than closer with the United States. Evidence show the supernatural violence includes supersonic winds, volcanic eruptions, and swift inundation, creating the bulk of the sudden temperature change far below sub-zero freezing, perpetuous total environmental climate change. The muck comes from the inundation waters moving so swiftly, such a fantastic quantity of the water picks up all the kinds of the earth and mixes with it, homogenizes it in with the water, then lays it down in the muck layer. Vivid descriptions of the layer of the frozen muck are given by the Professor Frank C. Hyben of the Book of the Lost Americans. One of the best places to study the many layers of the muck laid down with the catalysm of the wall of the Grand Canyon or in the Badlands of the North Dakota. If you stand on the northern rim of the Grand Canyon, pick one stride with the file with the trace that would the earth as far as you can see in all directions, including the spire of the jutting upward of the canyon, you will find that the strata homogeneous from the top to the bottom of the earth. Where it goes, laid down with the uniformly thickness and sharply demarcated from the layers above and below. Furthermore, it happened to pick up the layer which contains gravel, rock, the boulders, and interspersed it through it, and was observed the usified muck of the gravel, rocks, the boulders, and distributed throughout the layer of the quite evenly in all directions. This is absolutely one way with each layer of the layer laid down evenly with a homogeneous so that all at once with all of the hypothesis, all other hypotheses fall into the oblivion in the light with the homogeneity factor of the conclusion of the certainness of the deposit based on the homogeneity factor of the strength further by the flatness, uniformity of the of thickness, and the independent characteristic each layer and the sharp demarcation between the two adjacent layers. Anyone Earth moved the business who looked for the tribe of the time of the deposit of each of the layer will immediately realize that there is absolutely no way to accomplish this feat through any of the known means of the engineering, nor is there any way that ordinarily profit nature to move that much of the earth and homogenize it even within the rocks and boulders necessary for the deposit all at once on an uncountable square mile of the surface of one single flat homogeneous, even the deep layer, and the only way to pass for the cubic mile upon cubic miles of water to move the spread speeds the supersonic range of the continent of the pick of the earth and dirt and rocks and boulders and unbelievable quantities mixed with the water mud have the earth and every rock and boulder grinded each other into the round off shapes of the pebble and finally with the deposit at once over the huge area of the land and even flat layer, human drives with muck of the rocks and boulders later dries out and though through ages sometimes ossified with the continents and it's frozen in polar zones. For many years, I searched and hunted the evidence of the witch calling, sloshing, fast moving the muck wire that become the traps into the human basin layer of the 1980s. I found the treasure trove of the showing of the evidence of the Arizona, Utah, known as the Momentum Valley. Never have I been impressed with the beauty of the nature as I was with the first viewing of the Momentum treasures of that valley. I hard to believe that such of the beauty come with the unimaginable and violence of the catalysm ponding on the landscape, which would not exhibit much of the catalysm before the last one, each contributing to his share of the tour of the structure that we see today, with the thick layers of the other layers mixed with thin layers after thinner ones, each with its unique color and characteristics show the demarcations between all the layers. They're all similar with the Canyon D Chalet with the southeast Momentum Valley a few miles. The thick layer approximately 60 to 80 feet thick, provided with the sloshing evidence that even though each of these thick layers show with the definite evidence that haven't been deposited all at once, each layer with its own color and integral appearance with a diagonal sublayer with a grain flow within each layer that tilted about 20 degrees off horizontal with adjacent sublayer with the tilted opposite of the direction both above and below. With the tilted sublayer with a compromising sublayer with a thick layer that is stacked up upon each of the 15 sublayers, all with the same thickness, each tilted with the opposite direction layer with adjacent sub. The evidence was then finally provided with the proof of the sloshing does occur with the catalysm, the rapidly with the boom of the muck water slosh back and forth across the alley deposit with a little itself with each of the slosh was moving fast with the deposit with the same amount of the itself with each slosh. The total being with a homogenized each sublayer has the same characteristics of each and every one above it and below it. And one again, only with the grain of the structure verified with the slant of each of the sublayer of this structure is evident in miles upon miles surrounding walls of the valley as well with the momentums therein. Before leaving Momentum Valley, I'd like to tell you about the special place for the eastern part of the valley, Mexican Hat. The small town that's sitting next to the San Juan River, a short plateau on the other side of the river, on the other side of the plateau with the rise of the most of the unusual mountainside of the world. As many geologists have declared who have the Mexican Hat from all over the world just to see the mountainside of its rise of 2,000 feet into the sky with all of the grandeur of the many of the sedimentary stratification, large, small, and inevitably unique of the feature of the whole mountainside is that with the sedimentary layers bent over and down toward the river as if they were trying to flow into it and disappear the thousands of feet with the sedimentary strata that are bent out over toward into the river in this fashion. Seen as one of the most dramatic I have ever seen, with it proving the super violence that occurred during the Cataclysm in the case of the huge fissure that opened into the earth from the San Juan River that flows now. Fissure being opened and up with a huge jaw of the opening of the throat of the molten layer, normally 60 feet miles beneath. Of course, the molten layer would be rise until a 60-mile throat, being 60 miles below the sheet, seeing the white hot molten everything beneath. The 60-mile thick with the shell pressed down with the wall would also provide a huge fissure with the pressure of the push, molten stuff upward within the gaping throat fissure. Now I have the most awful, horrific, appealing, with the formidable, the terrified, with the uncanny, ultimately violent, with the parasmatic, catalysmic collisions of the floor of the nature of the surface of our planet, even beyond the imagination, until you see yourself with the bright head of the Mexican Hat, this side of the mountain, the top of them in the cold, with the midst of the death throes. At this point, supersonically rampaging ocean, where the wind hits the scene as though we have the super earthquake, and a hugely opening of the fissure of the whole shell over the earth, opening on the path of the molten layer below, the pressed upward of the fissure of the molten invade of the melting hard layer of beneath the side over the mountain, on the 1,000 per mile per hour ocean water slaughtering the mountainside, with having left the foundation, driving it down into a huge fissure, screaming the molten stuff below, with the solidity of the mountainside, stop of feeding itself downward into the maw with the ocean, with the fury pass on, leaving the huge part of themselves lushing around back and forth in the valley, plus some of those arriving beautiful with the prestige moments of the standing toward today for us to see. In other words, the valley uphill with the sedimentary strata of the huge structure of the point upward with the rock, with the scorch, with the periphery of the places of the church of the rock, Alglythia region, each have the scorched and sedimentary boulders scattered around it near its base. I've read geologist reports, and I've been told by one of the tour of the guides of the Momentum Valley Lodge, one of the nicest places to say that he was ready with the geologist report telling with the lava flow of the Momentum Valley. I spent some time there for several years in the Momentum Valley, searching from one end of the other and the other end beyond the valley for evidence of the lava. I never found any evidence anywhere, even in the suggestion of lava. All I ever could find was a scorched sedimentary rock, which was from a distance could have fouled any one of the thickening of the lava rock. I have seen dark scorched rock and abandoned gold mines near Pikes Peak when the scorching occurred during Cataclysm, when heated from 60-mile molten layer, broken fissure of the 60-mile thick hard outer shell of the earth, and scorching the rocks in the shell. Alright, going back to the ocean water, the mixing of the earth and the rock with the laying down the layers, sloshing the sublayer with the sediment with a good measure for the speed of the width of the water most smooth over the land is provided with the use for the granite blocks for the eastern slope of the Jura Mountains of the France, the Delacour, Savaler, Von Bach, Duckler Jr., and De Saussure. Gives such of the information through the early geological observation dispersion of the alpine granite blocks through the mountains, valleys, and lakes of Italy, Switzerland, and France. Even Bakewell, through his early dissenting observation, lend more credence to the fast-moving water conclusion that other men, because of the loneliness of his arguments. The greater Swiss geologist Escher gave the most credence for the fast-moving water argument through his observations of the earliest concept set forth by J. Andrew de Clercq Jr. in the 1820s. Let's envision the Jura Mountains as if we were looking down from an airplane. The first we all have noticed that they are similar to the Allegheny Mountains of Pennsylvania, for they look like giant wrinkled-up carpet, rolling ridges running from the northeast to the southwest, which bordered with the follows the same direction in the middle of the range. You can see that these ridges have passed from here to there, and so the Persian ground came from the northwest through the ridge, one ridge to the southeastern slope of the next ridge in many places. It is well known that the fact that the Jura Mountains are non-gigantic, when the gigantic exhibit the thousands of the mountains, but it's still very deeper than them, the larger the Calories. Calcareous. However, the southern eastern slope of the ridge of the countless granite blocks hitting on the surface of the blocks are even away tons upon tons that haven't been traced with the Switch Alps across the Switch Valley with the southeast. I've looked several ridges due to the northwest of the Duros, you will find the granite blocks. Only when the southeastern slope of the ridge of the cluster, only on opposite paths of the ridge adjacent to the southeast. The blocks sit on the slope of the altitude the same as where they came from the Alps of the Italy in Switzerland, 50 to 80 miles across the valley from Switzerland to wherever they were deposited in Darius. In order for them to be found with the southeastern slope of the Darius, they would have the tremendous upheaval of the ground of the Italian-Swiss Alps occurring during the some climatic cataclysmic violence with the water moving in the source of the fantastic speed of sweeping the mighty block with the granite with the 50-80 miles across the Switzerland over the Darius through the pass of the deposit of the clustering against the southeastern slopes and the inner end of the Darius. If it's perfect, the picture of the supernatural found with the uncover of the Professor Frank Hyben in this study with the shred of the dismembered with the prehistoric animals of the Alaska bear with the quick and frozen with the muck together with a twist and turn, torn, burned, and quickened frozen tree with a hidden Hyben save that one of the necessary forces of the contributing effect of the supersonic winds. The only way to generate such winds over the tremendous area was to move the land in such a way that depart its normal west to east daily rotation, so the atmosphere continually is normal daily rotation, which for them being the supersonic speed relative to the land over which it's moving. Now, if the Earth's normal rotation in the ocean all rotate with the west to east with 1 revolution per day, when the cataclysmic with the curve of the 60 mile with the thick of the shell of the Earth, the slope of the direction differing from the normal of the rotation, the atmosphere continue with the normal rotation direction. The ocean also reviewed the change of the rotational direction, so the atmosphere of the ocean proceeded to move over the land massive, the passing with the underneath them and in a new direction. Some of the oceans and air move at the supersonic speed, with the respect of the land move at a different direction from the underneath, with the ocean moving over the land massive with such speed. It's easy to understand how the granite blocks were moved from the Alps and to Darius while losing little or no altitude. How cubic miles of the Earth can be picked up to mix with water, with the homogenized laid down in the even, flat, independent layer of the such as we find in the walls of the Grand Canyon, Monument of the Canyon of the Shelly. Further, we understand how irresistible, overwhelming inhalation force of the waters move with the arguably unbelievable speed of the blink of the eye, will obliterate an entire civilization into every vestige, anything they ever accomplished, even if at the times of the occasion, the simple dams break with the releasing the water of the small town below, with literally wiped out every splinter of evidence of the town and people that have been being there. One of the fingerprints of the cataclysmic giant hand leaves, telling of supernatural violence of the earth, is the plethora of the mammoth teeth of the many species found in the sharp demarcation boundaries between sedimentary layers, as you see with the exposure of the Grand Canyon speaks of the animal life being pulverized with the teeth. Only mammalian substance is hard enough to withstand the onslaught. Some places undergo less violent wind than the nation, to be sure that we were able to find the trait of the prehistoric civilization we had advanced to the achievement we deemed impossible for so many years ago. Let's go to the Tianusio of South America to see what's there. The Incas discovered the desert city in 12,500 feet altitude of the shore of the lake Titicaca in the 2nd century AD, although they lived in the land for generation upon generation, centuries after the century, left totally undisturbed. Anyone who has been hunted for the gold of the treasure of the mountains also have them in the New Mexico, known for the Indian credo. What is in the mountain belongs to the mountain. That means whatever you find does not disturb nor destroy, nor move, nor remove. You can read about it with a parade and movies or be told about, but there's nothing like seeing it is in the person who when a gold fever takes over an entire personality. It's kind of the consummate with the grief of the chain with the verdant outdoors man, wild-eyed, scheming with a secretive and intensive introvert with which could lead himself, others destruction, death from the greed of I've seen it. The Ticino was found in Pizarro with his band of the plunderers of the 1520s. The god fever of the evidently taken over the entire expedition of 1316 men of the perceived vandalized with almost everything inside of the smashed tiles of the statue searching for the gold. Thus they were huge silver bolts of the several of tons of each of the passing through the massive stone of the this, you guessed it, they broke up monoliths in order to obtain the silver bolts. There was one member of the early discoverers band, Priest Diego Alcabaso, who wrote down what he saw. I saw the vast, the half carved on its roof, the representative thatch. Then there were waters in the lake that was washed on the walls, splendid core of the city of the dead, standing in the fine core of the shallows of the water of the platform of the suburb colonnade, where the many of the few fine statues, men and women, so real that they seemed to be alive. Some of the gulbas for the upright, for the drinking cups, the others sat, the reclined as in life. Some walked in the stream, following with the accent. Ancient walls, woman carved in the stone with the dandled babies in flat laps, bore them on the backs of the infidels for the nature of the posture of the people. The stand stood reclined. Not one of these statues stands today with the greed of the civilization, literally devastated with the Dionysio with vandalism and theory. However, vandals through the century of the visit of this fabulous field storehouse of the history of the two did what most of us would have the treasure fee, but they ignored the intellectual values of which less of the obvious for the grave of the stone of the gate of the temple of the Calalicia has the inscription across the ebony arch of the open on its pillar with the train with the eye with the peer with the meaningless pictures carving the mermaid with the Arthur Paskaninsky to realize the importance of how he felt with Wendell Bennett and John and Phillips and Hen Schindler, Bellamy, and Peter Allen completed the picture with a brilliant disappearing translation of the pictures so aptly described in this book of the calendar at Tahitiano and their chapter of the great idol of Tahitiano. Evidence further the brilliance of the deciphering, translating the picture symbols carved in monolithic statue excavated for the buried temple of the book. It not only explained with the deciphering and the translation, but it tells that the adorous work performed in order to preserve the tremendous monolith. The only thing they don't explain is whether the huge statue has two left hands and no right hand. The works on the Bellamy and Allen show many of the things concerned with the calendar of the time stamp of the Tahitian of the two different epochs for the problem of the Caspian and Husband Bay area. Detail the difference between the hour of the day of the year. Then now I shall have those who wish to read the book with a man point with the discussion should have known that here is the idol of the calendar, both the record with the during with the both airs, retrograde with the monosatellite with the orbited around the earth during the idol's area, probably 29,000 to 8,500 years ago. The satellite was approximately 24,150 years of the Earth during calendar Kate with the era of the approximately 8,500 to 11,500 years ago. Satellite was approximately 23,360 miles from the Earth. Obviously, the moon satellite was far closer to the planet than the present moon. Obviously, past the Roche limit of approximately 8,000 miles from the Earth and disintegrated, accounting for many of the lands of prehistoric terrible impact of the Earth and asteroids and comets. Where do the moon satellite come from, and how did our planet capture it? Of course, where did our present moon satellite come from? Where did our planet capture it? Why did it happen? And to each moon satellite, are to make the sense of these questions must be answered. The bow and a tedious relationship may give it the key for the answer. The Titius and Bow, with the two German astronomers individually concurrently discovered the relationship with the 1873. We woke up through orbited numbers with the ring number and plans through Saturn with the rings numbering 0, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, multiple each for the 3 by 3 and 4. Each result divided by 10 and it becomes 0, 4, 0, 7, 1, 0. 1, 6, 2, 8, 5, 2, and 10, 0. Numbers expecting skippity 2, 8 represent the relative of the distance of known place for the planets from the Sun, the Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. 2.8 Jupiter and Saturn. 2.8 represent the known planet with each time was that for that distance. When the planet Uranus was discovered in 1781 and fit right with this year with the 19.6, the law seemed strengthening and the 10th search was initiated. Anything that might be 2.8 dense in 1801, the little planetoid Cereus was discovered in 2.8. By 1945, more than 1,500 more were found in the same orbit. It had been established the ring of the minor planets, planetoids, and asteroids. 1846, the planet Neptune was discovered and it seemed to disobey the rules set down by Bode Titus ship relationship. It had been 38.8 on the relative distance scale, but it was closer than 29.2. In 1930, the planet Pluto was discovered, and 1930 planet Pluto was discovered and the boat types lava seemed to fall apart completely. Pluto was found with 38.3 with the net, where Neptune was supposed to be, whereas lava seemed to be indicated that Pluto should be 77.2. Since the time of the revolution, commonly known as the boats, lava has been regarded with the astronomy to nothing more than insignificant curiosity. Perhaps the new look of the boats, laws in order with much of the correct within part with which appear the error in it seems to be only because there are lack of understanding the basics involved. First, instead of using relative numbers, we should work with a ring number, their orbited number. The first progression is 0, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, etc. representing the number instead of the progression which geometric expect with the 0 with the let's fill all with the numbers, making them the true arithmetic progression with the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and so on to 256. Now the progression ring with 0, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 13, 64, 128, and 256 can be regarded as fundamental rings, although the rings regarded with the harmonic rings between the two fundamental rings with lies half between the first harmonic, any ring which lies halfway between the fundamental and the first harmonic, secondary harmonic, any ring halfway between the second harmonic and the first harmonic, or the halfway between the second harmonic and fundamental with the third harmonic, and so on. The next step is to label the ring numbers of the planets as if they were positioned Alexa off. The next step is to label the ring numbers of the planets as they are actually positioned in the solar system, which can simplify with the table. If we take all the rings numbered with them up to 8, but then on the fundamental with the second harmonics beyond with the Uranus, then the fundamental, the 1, 2, and 3rd harmonics ring of the 256. First thing we notice of all of the planets, the fundamental except the Neptune, is the only planet which is on a harmonic ring, and appears with the first harmonic 96 between the Uranus and Pluto, which are fundamental 64 and 128 respectively. Now we come to another discover the number of the ring between the planets and creep farther away from the sum of the planets until they appear with the maximum number of the rings possible between the planets, 31. On the end of the 32nd ring, there has to be a planet whether the ring is fundamental or harmonic. There, where the Neptune with the 96th ring, first harmonic, and 32nd ring of the Uranus, Pluto on the 128th ring, and a fundamental 32nd ring of Neptune. Something else appeared apparently also. While the solar system was born, planets tried to be born on each ring. Full-blown planets were born on every fundamental, only 31 rings away from any harmonic ring away from the other planet. On all of the rings, minor planet were born a ring of the planetoid. With the there is 4 major planets instead of the ring of the planetoids, 8 less. Assuming the entire solar system is made up of 3 groups of the 4 major planets with the plus of the ring of the planetoids, and each group of this means that there may be 2 more undiscovered planets in the 120, 12 and 240. If we look at the minor planet rings, either Jupiter or the apply Kepler's law within them, we find that the moons of the Jupiter of the retrograde one that explain with the captured minor plane with the both inside and outside harmonic rings around Jupiter. Between we examine the result of the construction, let's look at our region of the solar system. Ring 256 with the commons of the turn around with the head back to the heart of the system. Further is known that it is more of the one planet outside of the Pluto. Other tables tells us that there are 3 planets of the rings of 116, 192, and 224. Total number of the rings tells us that they're fantastically numbered and captured, uncaptured minor planets yet to be discovered. Thus, the junk of the solar system. Let's look at an abbreviated table of the solar system. First, the orderly interpretation. Bode's law of the ring 256 appear with the sun, whether the sun belt is protons is. The belt must exist in the sun's magnitude field with the bipolar. Furthermore, outside of the planets, and they show the chart. It's apparent that our present moon, it was created with the rings of 3 and with the Probia of the 8 and with the Demio of 6 and the ring 7 of vacant. The present of the real challenge is whether it happened to be a minor planet from ring 7. The closeness of the phobia with the Demio to the Mars tells if the rings of 4, 5, and 6 clothed together with a tremendous amount, most probably through the succession of events of the solar system causing the sheer of the Cataclysms on Earth. It's logical that ring 7 also would have clothed the Mars rings, and the Mars would have the capture of the minor planet of the ring 7 as well with the phobia with the Demio of the Owens of the orbiting around Mars lost could have the close enough of the Earth to be stolen with the Mars, the Earth, and heavy moon satellites. So will describe the idiom in the calendar gate of T. Shinichio. Further, the closeness of the satellite with the Earth would have the justification premise that the loss was stolen the Earth from Mars. The multitude of legends springing from the Cataclysm 11,500 years ago, with Venus moving into orbit, or Venus changing her orbit, and most probably be described with the capture of our present moon from Ring 3, in which in its day, eons ago, evidently with a pretty fair planet with radiation belts are orbiting around the sun. In any case, the now vacant Ring 7, the record of the T, retrograde orbiting the moon, For the impacts created for the moon, the Mars, the mountains, of the dense of the material of the buried in the mantle of the earth is uncovered the perturbed to orbits of the man-made satellites of the Bode's law will expand with here to include the orbits of both fundamental and harmonic style, offering the orderly meaning to us. Instabilities of the solar system would whether the capture of the minor planet with the major planets may seem impossible and improbable. However, the conservative minor instability of the solar system, the Earth rotation would believe the major changes and possible if we can find the Encyclopedia Britannica mention that may be made two astronomically abrupt change of the Earth rotation, which the last 100 years of the planet over the Earth is now inherently body is a complex motor generator system. So their solar system, the Milky Way galaxy, is a parent super galaxy, and the universes in which we live and real life. Also, the astronomy TV channel recorded stability changes within the calendar game, the great idols. In light of the fantastic storm of the Tenishi of the crater drive of the civilization which ended abruptly about 11,500 years ago, we can look at other great prehistoric works in the stone which stand with the mysterious monumental memorials of lost engineering technologies, or lost engineering techniques there. Belblic and Belay of the Bond, formerly known as Olympias, where the three huge stones were fitted together to make a platform 300 feet long with a mate with the largest stone civilized in the quarry southwest of the town. May believe it or not, weighed 1,200 tons. The fantastic even would cover the prehistoric civilization, leaving the tool of the figurative hanging in mid-air. The prehistoric Saskatchewan, Peru, were with a 20,000-ton monolithic block of stone lies with the step upside down, overturned by the summit of the prehistoric supernatural wrath of nature. They're immobile as the silent bloom of the kettle drum into the space with the stand wall with incredible fitted huge stones. We hear so much of the tone of the statue of the Easter Island, but this is all the well of the gigantic, precisely fitted stone suggests that the same of the civilizations, Susquehannoan and Balbec, giant stones have not, with the exclusive of the Easter Islands, they can be found with the Tantanimo, or Chipa Pilio, the Nukava, and the Fataha, Rovivia, and Pertician in the Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. These statues of the eastern of the island were buried next to the recently excavated showed the geological environmental significance, which included excavators' lessons learned from the shrouds of the Grand Canyon Momentum Valley. Canyon de Chilitates with the look of the homogeneous, and there in the dirt wall of the excavation around the gigantic stone of the well, they were all buried in one to the colossal indignation. It appears to be that the reason of the tools being figuratively left in the mid-air quarries the Easter Island, as well as those of the Balik. Mother Nature performs her own works in the stone of which conservative time clocks for us to take the Niagara Falls, for instance, which falls first started with the river flow over the cliff with the mouth of the gorge below the falls is today. There was no gorge, as there the years went by with the water broken away with the cliff by bit by bit, with the year by year, with the century from century, with the deformed of the 7-mile-long gorge, which represented the below falls today. With the past 100 years, breakaway with the Canadian fall, with an average of approximately 4.5 feet per year. When the falls were young, the gorge was 2 to 3 miles, and so were the being carved out with the river, the breakaway with the faster. Since the falls were nearer, and the depth of the water passing from over the cliff, of the deep of the height, over the shift, over the grave, of the reasonably airly, over the breakaway, the figure would be with the 6.1 to 6.0 to 6.1 feet per year, with the bank of the average fall of the gorge below with about 7,000 years of the births over the both fall of the gorge, and coinciding with the oceanographic data, which tells us the ocean over the world took a sudden rise of over 200 feet and stayed risen gradually lower than the height since then. Their lives levels of the today since Anthony fall of the upper Mississippi River, the Minnesota, the Bears, and other telltale sail throughout nature were share of the recorded time clock with the gorge below those of the falls, and 8 miles long with over the past century. The breakaway has averaged 5.5 per year, with a repeat of the same reasoning process that would you to analyze the gorge below the Niagara Falls will come up with the same figure with the age of the St. Anthony's fall of the gorge below with them approximately 7,000 years. These dating with the plus the other eruption with the lava around the pyramid of Coluccio with the Mexico lead us to the date with the last cataclysm in the north flood somewhere around 7,000 years ago. Earthly dating is 11,500 years ago, but the abrupt end of the Laurentian Basin, the ice cap of Canada, with the ice cap of southwestern East Australia, plus the same day with the jamming the barrier with the countless animal, fish, and mammals, the birds and humans of the Majarkian Marsh, southern and eastern Australia, plus the same day with the abrupt civilization to Asia by the Indonesian, plus with the scientific data of all over the world showing the abrupt worldwide climatic change at the same time that established 11,500 years ago with the closing of the estimate for Adam and Eve catalyst from the one preceding the Noah's flood. We'll accept the Talanesian dating of approximately 11,560 years ago. It isn't interesting with the New Stone Age, the Old Stone Age datings coincide with the time of the Noah's and catalysm and Adam and Eve catalysm. It's to the plane that each catalysm leaves this planet with less than 1% of all life surviving. Those merger of the spot over the world. Some of the humans survived the world was left to live and by with them. Who is even a shovel whatsoever the clothes have. They have a short time these clothes will last. You can understand how each day with the entire day with the total effort spent on the fighting of the flood as a plant food with hunting and fishing can just survive the fighting. For survival extremely unimaginable. Most of those who survive cannot teach the language, ethics, mathematics, history of the governmental, anything that which would regard with the classical education. There are any children. Dad tells the kids about the Indonesia and they believe they because he's their dad. By the time they're grandchildren, they do not believe the word that he says. Because, there has to be a little off his rocker and tells the stories like that. It's a matter of huge generation catalysm between a verbal legend becoming something that right with or on, and those who survived who has the language skill to take on and write, even what they did with the writing of tools. Furthermore, who has the time to write and teach anything with a top priority for each and every day with the survival? Alright, let's go back with the date. Emerging data show that the catalysm previous to Adam and Eve was about 8,500 years ago. Previous to the 29,000 years ago, no thanks to the mathematician, just a layout structure of the nature of the previous to one complex of 43,750 years ago, with a mathematically function the helicoid or all correlation of the data I regarded of the most striking them to be with the Shinnard Cave of the Iraq. And we're going to pause this for a second. Alright, overall, the correlation of the data I regard with the most striking in the Shinnard Cave of the Iraq. The Smithsonian Institute expedition headed with Ralph S. Solek and Iraqi Director General of the Antique of the share with in this work with the carbon-14 day with the show with the boundary between the layers laid down with the seventh civilization to demonstrate with the dates of the catalysm 7,000, 11,500, 8,500, 29,000 years ago, plus the incredible fact that no carbon-14 was deposited in the cave during the Caspian Sea with the North Pole air with the 29,000 to 8,500 years ago, but the entirely logical sense of the cave would have been so close to the North Pole that plausibly have been enclosed off the polar ice cap. Consequently, no living matter could have been intended for the cave that it take for the living matter to absorb the carbon-14 for us to find the end date. Thus, the crude cave is much memorial for the last four catalysms in the Tahitian. Speaking of the memorials, have everyone lived with the catalysm written with the experience of leaving the personal memory of the occasion. Of course, he would first look like Genesis. Three catalysms were mentioned. Known as Indonesia, with the last one with the 70,000 years ago, but the Adams of Eve 11,500 years ago, previously 18,500 years ago, barely mentioned Genesis 2. For the two other stories, if they exist, they are most intriguing. One of them is Noah's time, the other time, and Adam's and Eve's time from Greece. 1849, Austin Henry Layard started excavating the mountain of the Kajinkian on the banks of the Tigris River. It was discovered the fabulous city of Nava, previously known as the through the Old Testament. He discovered the palace built on the body with the emperor of the Sennacherib, a grandson of Sennacherib, by one of the concubines he added the library to the palace. He sent the emissary out of the comb. His kingdom, the original tablets, worthy to being in his library. The missionaries bear over the tablets to bring them into play with the absolute had exact copies made each one of the return of the original with the right of the rightful owners. He had some 30,000 copies made of the clay tablets, put them all in the library, and there was about tablets for the Layard found. Among the tablets were 12 comprising the epic of the Gishmal, the man who was at the time a legendary king of the fire dynasty of Iraq, closely following the Great Deluge, and he has since been shown that had been a real human being. Galatians saw the secret and eternal life driven to do so by the death of the friend of the Enkidu. He told himself he should find a man with a euphemism who had been granted eternal life by the gods. He found euphemism in Gulmish, successfully persuaded to tell his story to Euphemism, stated that indeed he had been granted the secret of the eternal life, and he was told by the gods. A man of Sharup, son of the Urbato, the abandoned wealth of the scorned possession, save thyself, return from thy house, build a ship, let it well measured. It described the ship built from the principal naval architect of the ship that could not be tipped over a square, probably meaning oblong. After he built it, he launched no less than 8 shakedown cruises. Each time he would bring it back and talk and balk about bitumen and check it over and again. And finally, he had the ship shape which had the bell jar of the feast of the liberate its completion of the bear wine Venetian version and mouton served all the well who came. Imagine this own neighborhood. Some of the neighbors must have the thought of the real night. On the very next day of the feast, he decided that it was time to load the ship and see it set for the sea of the cruise for survival. I've loaded the ship and the whole harvest of the life. I have family and my friend of the beasts of the field, the cattle of the field, the craftsmen, and the tools of the trade. I made them embark. I embarked and closed the door, and soon the gleam of the dawn shone in the sky of the skies, darkened the black clouds gathered inside them. At high thunder, and soon all light with the turn of the darkness, brother, I recognize the brother, don't more, but the animals in the sky no longer is of each. The euphemism described the onslaught of the storm that was generated sheer with all terror of the ship, the foul of that. For 6 days the night's wind fled with the march time of the holistic with the overwhelmed land, and with 7th day of the dawn, the ill wind still with the ocean, with the flood of the which they had waged war like an army was seized and opened a window with the beheld with the devastation. All of the mankind turned into the mud and fall. High and flat the rooftops lay swamped, and thousands of the dead of man and beast and cattle lay floating in the mirror. Then he proceeded to describe them bumping into the mountain, releasing the 3 birds, and then bringing back with a leaf, and followed by the disembarkment of the building of the altar and more. Single page addendum added to the book here. Alright, since you go to the preface of the astronomy of the Australia with the Dr. Arthur Blessive that was observed the progressing of the phenomena which he had no idea were directly related to next catalysm. He observed through the monthly measurement of the sun's temperature for the past 5 years, the sun's temperature decreasing at a rate and predict that it will go completely in 1999 or 2000. He cannot predict that it will reignite very shortly thereafter. Where he discovered the authentication of the strap of the next catalysm predicted that Adam and Eve strove through the scientific rationale with the Nostradamus and Scallion through the clairvoyants. What does Dr. Blessy predicts usually within a short period of time uttered the utmost with the sun completely out of the atmosphere. Euphemism describes on page 101, first paragraph, the interesting Blessium authenticates extremely unusual black darkness for the euphemism, describes an immediately following daybreak. If you want to complete with the technical explanation, it takes pages. Please send $2.50 with the Benjel Tiger Press, and you can insert it back into your book. Alright, we'll cut the book. We'll cut the chapter there.